Hello and welcome to week 8, where we're going to be talking about evaluation questions, or EQs, and various approaches to evaluation design, which is related in large part to research design, but is different in that it serves an evaluation purpose rather than a research purpose. To start with, I just want to try to emphasize the importance of writing good evaluation questions. A metaphor that I've come up with over the years is to think about evaluation questions like the narrow part of an hourglass, where at the beginning of a study you start at the top of an hourglass, where as an evaluator maybe you don't even know that much about the program that you're going to evaluate, or if it's your own program, you know about it, but you haven't started focusing in on particular elements of the program that you want to look at. And then you cast about for, okay, why am I doing this evaluation? What is the purpose? Is it a process evaluation? Is it an outcome evaluation? Things start out pretty broad, pretty vague. And then as you talk to stakeholders, as you consider the life cycle of the program, which I'm going to talk about more in just a moment, you start to hone in, you start to whittle it down to say, okay, we need to look at these participants for these purposes, and we're gonna just use the last 2 years of data. We're not going to go all the way back to the beginning of the program. You start to whittle it down until you get to the narrow area of the hourglass, where you hone everything down to 1 or 2 or 3, in some cases more, but just a handful of guiding questions, which for those of you who are experienced with research are very similar to research questions, but the questions, the overarching questions that guide the inquiry. And then from that point, from that narrow point in the hourglass, the whole rest of the study unfolds and expands out from that. Your decisions about data collection, your decisions about whether it's qualitative or quantitative, your decisions about sampling, about reporting, about the use, all the implications that follow upon the conduct of your study all hinge on that narrow part of the hourglass, the evaluation questions. And I should have mentioned that up at the top of the hourglass, that is where, according to this metaphor, you would find your paradigm, your worldview on epistemology, ontology, methodology, axiology, because nobody actually starts with a blank slate in any study. You come in with your, even though there's such an important emphasis on working with bias and trying to minimize bias, as you've all said so eloquently in your reading responses over the first part of the semester, it's clear that people come at the work with particular assumptions and preconceived notions about how to know about the world and how to act in the world. So, using this hourglass metaphor, those considerations would be what you might find up at the top of the hourglass. But that has to be whittled down, narrowed down, made more precise into the middle of the hourglass, which is that precise, well-worded, and I have to emphasize the fact that the words matter in an evaluation question. We'll see that as we go throughout the module. A slight change in wording of an evaluation question could then in turn have pretty significant implications for what the rest of the hourglass, the part that widens back out again, what that might look like. So keep this in mind. And then also, as you saw on the opening page of this module, it's important to emphasize that when we talk about evaluation questions, we're not talking about questions on a survey or in an interview or in a focus group that you might ask directly to program participants. This is a confusion I've seen a lot over the years. It kind of makes sense when you tend to think about an evaluation, quote unquote, as that paper that you hand somebody at the end of a program in order to get their feedback, then it might be natural to think that an evaluation question is a question on that evaluation. But as I hope you have seen by now, throughout the course, that since there's so much more that goes into an evaluation, handing a paper to someone, that paper is not an evaluation. That's a data collection tool that might be couched within a much broader and more complex evaluation study. So taking into account the fact that an evaluation is a much broader endeavor, even if it's a relatively well-bounded evaluation of a specific program. The evaluation question refers to the overarching guiding question. So to touch a little bit on the example I put in the opening page, an evaluation question would not be, did you like the program? Or did you find the speaker interesting? Or did you learn more about, or do you know the correct temperature for cooking beef, or for planting soybeans, or for whatever it might be, the program that you're trying to evaluate? Those would be perhaps items on a survey or a focus group or some sort of other data collection approach, but they would not be your overarching evaluation questions. The overarching evaluation questions are not posed directly to the participants, but they sum up essentially what you want to know. So you might want to know, to what extent did participants in the program gain knowledge about safe food preparation techniques in the kitchen? Or you could even have an example evaluation question about satisfaction. Sometimes, if that's interesting to you, then that's a valid EQ, but it would have to be framed in the terms such as, were participants satisfied with the program? So it's not posed directly to them. Usually want to move beyond simple satisfaction type evaluation questions to get more at changes in knowledge, attitude, behavior, get more at outputs and outcomes, which are elements which you've articulated in your logic models. And this week we will talk about a bit how you can use those logic models to help you identify good evaluation questions. Okay. So from the readings in the Mertens and Wilson, I found a few boxes really helpful in terms of framing what we're talking about this week. In Chapter 8, there was this really great box on evaluation purposes and types, because essentially, and the chapter goes through each of these in a fair bit of detail. And if you go down the purposes column, so the left-hand column, essentially, this is, even though they're not phrased in question form, they start giving you hints about the types of EQs that might be related to these different types of evaluation. So the EQ for a capacity building project or a needs assessment would be fundamentally different than the EQs for a summative evaluation or an impact evaluation. So no matter what evaluation project you're working on, and including for your practicum evaluation plans, for those of you who are doing that, you need to be very clear in, one part of the evaluation plan, which we'll talk about later, is the evaluation purpose statement, which, for those of you who are familiar with research articles, it is kind of similar to the abstract in a journal article. So it's a succinct summary of everything else that is to come to follow. But it's the most important part of it in an evaluation plan or evaluation report, it's applicable to both plans and reports, would be the purpose. So this evaluation was to assess the needs of beginning farmers in Virginia regarding their training needs, for instance, or access to financing, or whatever it might be. Or if it's a cost analysis evaluation, probably the first line in the evaluation purpose statement or the executive summary of the report would be, the purpose of this evaluation is to assess the return on investment in the parenting education program in Roanoke, or something like that. So the purposes, which are pegged to the particular type of evaluation you're doing, then help you start getting closer to what type of EQ or EQs you need to ask. From Chapter 9, we're introduced to the notion of design in evaluation, which, like I said before, is certainly related to research design. And we're going to talk a little bit less about it today, but it has a lot to do also with your evaluation questions. In fact, I would say, and also I have to just say right now that people define design in a few different ways. It means it means more to some people and a little bit less to others. But in a nutshell, I would say it describes how the study will be conducted. So, in a sense, what information will be collected from whom, using what tools, with what frequency, under what conditions. In a sense, that's design. So, thinking back to the hourglass metaphor, as soon as you get to your EQs at that narrow, narrow, narrow center of the hourglass, the first decision that follows upon your articulation of the questions would be what evaluation design are you using? And it's not actually that linear of a decision, because really it's kind of, you've kind of flipped back and forth in an iterative cycle between phrasing your evaluation question and deciding on your evaluation design. Again, all couched in your paradigms and your overall purposes for doing that evaluation. So one thing that honestly is not always discussed in every evaluation textbook or evaluation training course, but that in my own training has been a very influential and important part of getting to good evaluation questions and doing good evaluation, is this idea of life cycle analysis. In the last couple of years, there have been some really nice papers written on it. In fact, I will put into the additional readings folder a couple papers. So if this idea piques your interest, you can go look at those optional papers and read a little bit more about it. But at the very least, it's a really important idea in terms of coming up with appropriate evaluation questions. And a lot of this is discussed in the systems evaluation protocol, so you can also go there to look for more information on this idea. The notion is quite simply that programs grow and develop over time. So they develop over time, just like humans or other organisms. They have a life cycle where they're born, they mature, they grow, and they age. And this is not always linear, and not always, certainly if to extend the metaphor of humans, thinking of maturity rather than physical age might be more apt, because physical age is pretty much a linear progression. I guess in the case of Benjamin Button, it was going the other way. But anyway, if you think about maturity, generally research has proven that young women mature earlier than young men, which is why you find college freshman males acting like immature kids often vis-a-vis their female counterparts. Hopefully that doesn't offend anyone. And also related to this idea is the notion of co-development or co-evolution between the program and its evaluation. So, and this is, again, a very important criterion for quality evaluation in my book, and more according to the field at large. So here on the left-hand side, you see a set of descriptions or definitions of 8 different program life cycle phases, phase 1A all the way through phase 4B. And with the titles or the brief one-word descriptions of the cycles over on the left. And this is actually drawn from biomedical research and pharmaceutical research, where new treatments or new products, biomedical products, have to go through 4 phases of testing before they are able to be approved for use in the general public. So this is building on that, but of course in a social science sense and in a program evaluation sense. And it goes from programs just being born, and where there's still a good deal of maybe adaptive management, flexibility, change based on not having all the kinks worked out of the program theory or the program delivery, going through revision into a phase where it might be more protocolized and have set curriculum, set handouts, set activities that are used pretty consistently across the board, and then going all the way through to a dissemination phase where programs might be applied in multiple geographic locations, multiple counties, multiple states. And so that is basic, again, it's not linear, but in general terms, that is the arc of development or evolution of a program life cycle. Then over on the right, you have the evaluation life cycles, which go through process and response, change, comparison and control, and generalizability. And we'll come back to this a bit, and you've already seen some discussion of similar ideas in the readings about experimental designs and the methods-driven branch, really feeling that the generalizability and comparison and control types of studies are the gold standard or are always the best. Like you've already seen that, but we're gonna come back to that in a few weeks. And what this life cycle analysis does is helps respond to people who think one particular phase of evaluation is applicable for all evaluation needs. Because this type of analysis, in my opinion, shows that that is not true. There are different stages of evaluation, different evaluation life cycles, which are aligned or are more appropriate for different program life cycle development stages. And that being said, you can't just pick an evaluation design, such as a randomized experiment, and say it is the gold standard always and everywhere, because it might be an appropriate evaluation approach for a phase 3B program, but not for a brand new program that you just started 2 months ago and are implementing for the first time on Tuesday. So this graphic is a representation of the importance of alignment. If you look at the red circle A, that is it falls right on that regression line where the program life cycle, which is a 4A, so a pretty mature program being delivered in multiple contexts, multiple places, is being evaluated with a very robust and advanced evaluation design, and so that is well aligned. Program B, the yellow circle, is a program which has been around for a while. It's probably well protocolized, well developed. There might be curriculum guides and things like that, but it's still being subjected to a pretty immature or pretty basic evaluation. So this might be something like a post-only assessment with some questions about satisfaction, some questions about knowledge. So it's off the line, it's below the line. And essentially the problem with that is that you're perhaps missing out on some big impacts, some big results, because you're not asking the right questions. Then program C, the green circle, is a relatively new program. It's in the program life cycle of 1B, but it's being subjected to a relatively advanced life cycle in terms of evaluation. And unfortunately, this often happens in some funding contexts where the funders have bought into the rhetoric that particular designs, like an experimental design, are better, and so they might force any program receiving funding from them to use that design. So even though the program is still starting out, there's this maybe a comparison group being tracked alongside the program participant group. And one of the big risks for that is the possibility of both type 1 and type 2 error, not to mention meaning of either false positive or false negative. You might sort of by chance find that the program has an impact according to this rigorous quote-unquote evaluation, when really that was just that one time that you were offering it. And if you offer the program again in 3 months and do that same evaluation, you might find no positive findings. And then the same is true of finding a false negative, where because the program is still under development, still in flux a little bit, maybe it is having a big impact on the participants or on the community, but it didn't show up in the evaluation because you were using adaptive management in the program, but that evaluation design was not well suited to pick up on those changes over time. And in addition, the further you go up the y-axis axis of evaluation life cycles, generally there's feasibility constraints. Those later life cycle evaluations tend to be more expensive, require more human resources, more time, and so you don't want to do one of those unless it's appropriately aligned with the program life cycle stage of the life cycle stage of the program. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is actually drawn from one of the additional reading papers that will be posted. But if you're interested in the idea of validity, this is what this is about. It's an argument to consider more types of validity than just internal validity and external validity. There's actually a lot of good writing on this. Again, if this is first of all a rather confusing diagram, and it's pretty challenging concepts behind the diagram. But this is just another argument for taking a more ecological approach to program evaluation. So in the field of human development, there's ever since Urie Bronfenbrenner in the 60s and 70s, there's been this notion of ecological development where children, humans, whomever, develop on multiple scales, multiple levels in relation to their environment. And the same thing could be said of programs. And when you think about program planning, for those of you who have taken the program planning course or who plan programs in your work, it's interesting to think where programs come from. Do they just fall out of the sky? Does your boss tell you to do them? Do you just dream them up one day and write them down and start doing them? There's all different ways that programs come to be, and this graphic is showing that they can be developed bottom up, whereby you need to start small from the initiation phase, have process and response evaluation, where construct validity is more important. You need to really pay attention to, are we doing the things we think we're doing, and are we measuring the things that we think we're measuring? Then going back to the green ring along the inside, you see the other three life cycles, and with their associated types of evaluation and different types of validity associated with those evaluations. And so you get down to the bottom right, you have a more top-down approach to program planning and evaluation. So again, this is a rather advanced idea, but if it's of any help to you, or if you're interested in learning more, contact me and we can talk more about that as well. Okay. So as I've already hinted at, evaluation questions really have to do with what you want to know about your program, what kind of claims you want to be able to make at the end, because this is fundamentally related to how you pose your evaluation questions. So if you want to say, people liked my program, then you can make that claim by asking, to what degree are participants satisfied with the program? But if your evaluation question is, to what degree are participants satisfied with the program, you cannot then, later after the study, make any sort of claim about what they learned, or skills they gained, or practices that they're going to now apply in their lives, because you don't know anything about those things, those constructs, those outcomes. You know about satisfaction, because that was what your question was about, but you cannot make any claims beyond those claims about satisfaction. I just mentioned the term construct, and we're going to come back to this a bit next week, I believe. And construct is just a fancier word for idea, basically, or concept. So satisfaction is a construct. Scientific literacy is a construct. Food safety is a large construct that can be broken down into smaller ones. But it's important especially when you get to measurement, but even in thinking about the correct wording of your EQs, to be aware of your constructs, your key ideas, your concepts in your evaluation questions. What are they? Why are they there? And how do you define them? And then, again, this is that iterative cycle of thinking forward and then looping back about what claims you want to make, but also about what evidence would you need in order to make those claims? How would you know it if you saw it? You want to make claims about people's knowledge. You want to say that your program helped them know more or learn something new. Well, there's a bunch of different ways you could perhaps get evidence on that knowledge, but you have to start thinking about what that evidence might be. This is, in a sense, this is more of a question for measurement, but measurement or data collection is fundamentally intertwined with the wording of your evaluation question. And then, very relatedly, feasibility, credibility, accuracy, utility, how are you going to get at that evidence? Okay, so here is where your logic models can come into, can become useful for you. Here we're using the example of these pathway models, which again you did not create, but you can imagine that you have a pathway model where you have activities linked to outcomes, outputs and outcomes, and it kind of articulates through those arrows your hypothesized causal linkages, and but you can use your logic model in the same way, essentially, to first of all, because you've now done a logic model, you've articulated your activities, that which the program does in order to try to change something in the world. So by looking at your logic model, you could say, okay, we really need to focus our EQ on this activity or this activity. In this case, it's one activity called Series of Science Discovery Workshops. So you could come up with a question about that. For instance, you might want to know about the perceived utility of the activity, in which case your question would be, to what extent did participants perceive activity A as useful? Or you might have more of a process type evaluation, again, relatively early life cycle, but because it's maybe a newer program, you want to know about how it was implemented. How well was it implemented relative to some other guidelines? For those of you who work in youth development, there are some established research-based guidelines for what constitutes a quality youth program, and you could use those as a benchmark. Thinking back to Tom Schwantz, the preface in the chapter 1 of the book on Evaluation Foundations Revisited, he talked very clearly about the need to establish criteria. So this is one case where for the evaluation question to even have a sense, have a meaning to it, you would need to have some criteria to compare the implementation. You could get a little bit vaguer, but it's still a valid question, and say, was the program or was the activity implemented well? So then you just have to define what do you mean by implementing it well. Just a few other examples of questions that you could ask focusing on an activity. And this one, it's an implementation process type of question, but one that is often very important, and in this sense it actually goes a little bit towards perhaps a culturally responsive evaluation, where at least you're paying attention to demographic information, and perhaps your program has a history of only serving one population, maybe a majority white population, and you've been leaving out other segments of the community for some reason or another. In that case, and if you have a goal to reach a more holistic, more diverse group of the community, then this type of evaluation question would become very important, because you can't change anything, you can't make any claims about the participants you're reaching unless you ask an evaluation question about the demographic characteristics of your participants. And then following through on the same logic, you can focus evaluation questions around an outcome. So in this case, there's an outcome which is youth have increased awareness of science topics. So if you ask, okay, we're focusing on this this outcome, what are our key constructs? Well, one, you could say awareness. What does awareness look like in this case? And you could say then also another construct is science topics. Or maybe that's all one construct together. It depends how much you slice it down. So maybe the construct is awareness of science topics. But you have to define that because there's as many science topics as there are stars in the sky, and it's not likely that your program is going to increase youth awareness about all of them. So you have to define your criteria. What science topics are we talking about? So here are some evaluation questions which could be focused on an outcome such as this one. So we've got one on, two. These are all about awareness because that's part of the question, but you want to look at just their state of awareness at the end of the program. So that has implications for measurement because you don't have to really do a pretest. You just have to do a post-test because you're only interested, according to the question, in their level of awareness at the end. Then getting back to demographics or diversity within the group, you could ask a question about, maybe do boys and girls have the same or different level of awareness at the end of the program. And then you could get more specific, again defining that construct, and pick 5 main topics or even 1 main topic. Maybe the program provided information about a whole variety of topics, but you were really most interested in, did they learn about precision farming or something like that? Who knows? Then you would ask about that. Then this is quite common as well. You might focus your evaluation on the linkages between an activity and an outcome, or an outcome and another outcome. And that's really testing that causal assumption that's represented by the arrow. Did activity A lead to outcome X, Y, or Z? But still, even within this type of EQ, there's a variety of ways that question could be asked. You could be asking on the average level, does this linkage exist? You could be asking at the individual level, does this linkage exist? You could ask a slightly more difficult question about what is the effect or the impact of the activity on the outcome. And that poses certain challenges to methodologically, but it of course can be done. This would be more of an impact evaluation. And so this is just another way of saying what I just said. There's an increasing burden of causality as you go down this list, and it follows that then the evaluations become more and more challenging in order to progress through the life cycle stage of the evaluation life cycles as you're really building the evidence base for that program. So this is some guidance for the activity that I'm asking you to do this week. You're going to come up with some elements of your logic models. You can just ignore the pathway model part because we didn't do pathway models. So either an assumption, an activity, outcome, a linkage, a contextual element, and then you're going to list it on the worksheet that will be posted. And then you're going to justify why you chose that. Is it, and again, you're kind of doing this as, of course, an exercise, so you maybe didn't necessarily talk to stakeholders about it, or so just it's kind of a role play activity. Just put yourself in the shoes of a real evaluator preparing to do an evaluation of this program, and come up with a rationale for why focus on that element. What is it? Is it important to program participants? Is it important to the funder? Maybe your logic model, as you did the logic model, you realized, wow, this is really an important outcome. If this doesn't happen, then the whole rest of the causal chain is probably not going to occur. And then, in your own words, in plain English, vernacular language, write out what is it that you want to know in relation to this element. You could even say, I want to know blah, 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 blah. Then, using some of the lessons in the text and in this presentation, try to formulate it. Oh, and of course, and the other worksheets, which will be guidance documents that'll be attached to the assignment as well. Try to formulate it as a proper evaluation question in slightly more formal language, and then reflect on the potential utility of the, assuming that question can be answered, can be responded to. How will that help your program? How will the responses be used? And that has to do again with this notion of claims. What claims will you be able to make? So perhaps you could say, once we've conducted this evaluation, we will be able to report to the city, the town board, that our program caused a 10% savings for homeowners, or something like that. Okay, well that's good. And then by doing that, you can hopefully continue to get town funding. So that would be your plan for how you would use the evaluation results that would come about based on this question. Now, relatively quickly, I do want to touch on design. We don't have an activity about design today, but you will need to, in an evaluation plan, you will need to specify what your evaluation design is. So I'm just going to go over some notions of design. Again, I've defined it. I don't have a slide on this, but I sort of think of it in terms of what information or data will be collected from whom, using what tools, with what frequency, under what conditions. But as Trosham says here, it's the glue that holds the whole inquiry project together. He's talking about research, but the same goes for evaluation designs. And it provides a structure. Every definition of evaluation, pretty much, talks about systematic inquiry. It has to be structured. So the design, in addition to the EQs, are that glue, that framework, that scaffolding that holds everything together. For those of you who are, for instance, involved in scientific research, more outside of social science, agricultural research, etc., this design notation might be familiar to you, or if you've taken statistics as well. And it's not always necessary to do this in an evaluation plan or an evaluation report. It depends, again, partly on your paradigm and partly on the expectations of the folks who are going to be reading that. But it's important to know about, at least, and it might be helpful for you to represent your evaluation design in this way. So this is a picture of a design in design notation, where the R indicates that the groups are randomly assigned. So this is, you can already tell it's a randomized controlled trial. And then the O represents an observation, so a moment of data collection. The X is the program, or the intervention, or the treatment, to use that overly medical term. You probably don't think about your program as a treatment, but in this sense, that's what they call it. And then the two different lines represent the two groups. The one group that is participating in the program, and then the other group, because there's no X, that means that they are the control or the comparison group. And then the second set of O's are the post-test. And with those O's, you can use subscripts to talk about different measures. So maybe O1 is a survey that is going to be administered as a pre-test, post-test to both groups. And then O2 would be maybe a focus group. And that's not done as a pretest. You see that that's after the X, later in time. So that's the focus group is done with both the treatment group and the control group, but only after the program has been offered. And again, you see from the citation Trosham 2006, these are drawn from the research methods knowledge base, which we've read some stuff from earlier in the semester. And again, it's that's largely about research, social research in general. And it's a very useful resource. So you can visit that whenever you want. And on the left hand side, there's kind of a table of contents that you can click through to find. Say you have questions about sampling later on. I think I refer you back to sampling later in the semester, because there's some good lessons on sampling in there as well. So again, this approach here that Trosham is presenting is all quantitative, essentially. It's from the methods-driven branch. It's post-positivist in nature, but these might be appropriate designs given your life cycle stage, given your stakeholder interests, given the types of claims you want to make, and given your evaluation questions. So all those different considerations feed into choosing the design. The questions drive the methods, and before they get to methods, they drive the design. So you see a sort of decision tree on the left about whether it's a randomized experiment. Scriven would say there's no such thing as a true experiment in social science. So, and then there's a whole other set of designs that Mertens and Wilson talk about called quasi-experimental designs. And then there's the vast majority of evaluations are non-experimental, meaning there are not control groups in multiple measures and there's not randomization because that's not needed. However, just to reiterate, there are some funders, including the U.S. government, Department of Education, back in 2003 especially, who thought and who were emphasizing that all evaluations of all education programs should always be randomized or quasi-experiments. Then over on the right, you see the design notation for those. Many evaluations fall into the bottom row there, post-test only, non-experiment, where the X is the program and the O is the survey that you hand out after the program. But not everything is quantitative. Very often there's qualitative research. One of my favorite texts on qualitative research and qualitative evaluation is this one by Joseph Maxwell, cited down here below. And he uses this interactive model of research design, which again could also, you replace the word research with evaluation, it all holds true. And it shows you 4 different, usually you start in the upper left with the goals, the conceptual framework, to the research questions, then to concerns about validity and methods simultaneously. With all those arrows, you can kind of bounce back and forth. That's his point, that it's interactive and that you're considering all 5 of those elements at the same time. So you see already, as I mentioned earlier, the various definitions or meanings of design. Here Maxwell's talking about interactive model of design, but he's not having X's and O's. He's not talking about randomization. So as opposed to, or in contrast to, the perhaps standard quantitative notion of design and how you would notate it, this is very different. So if you were doing a qualitative evaluation, you would not use X's and O's. You might use a chart like this to specify what are the goals, what's the conceptual framework. If you're using critical race theory as your conceptual framework in your qualitative evaluation, well then you need to represent that in part in the design and show how that influences your research questions, how that has implications for validity or trustworthiness of your study, and then eventually what methods you're going to use. So this is just to show that in a qualitative framework, how the meaning of design is different, and how in your plan or in your evaluation report you would represent that. And then more and more there's mixed methods in evaluation and research. Donna Mertens, the lead author of the text, is really a leading scholar in the whole mixed methods world. She's done a great deal of work on that topic, including editing the Journal of Mixed Methods Research for a number of years until last year when she stepped down from that position. But especially considering the popularity of pragmatic evaluations and utilization-focused evaluations, mixed methods often is the approach that is used. And so what does design mean in a context of mixed methods? Again, it means slightly different. And here, from a lecture from Burke Johnson, another leading scholar of mixed methods, the word design is used in relation to this matrix, which provides a sort of typology of different mixed methods designs. So here in mixed methods, the design has to do with when and where the qualitative portion and the quantitative portion of the study occur, and what the relationship between the qualitative and quantitative portion of the study is. And so I think in a nutshell that sums up the main concerns and the main considerations around mixed methods designs. So don't get too hung up on not having a specific definition for design, because, as always, it depends on what type of evaluation or research you're doing. But hopefully by presenting what design means for quantitative post-positivist studies, for qualitative, maybe constructivist values-oriented studies, and for pragmatic mixed method studies, you can find yourself in one of these approaches, and then be able to, down the road, ensure that your evaluation questions are appropriate, not just for your stakeholders, not just for the life cycle of the program, but also for the design and the ultimate claims that you're going to be able to make once you conduct your hypothetical evaluation. So with that, I thank you for listening, and wish you good luck as you draft your evaluation questions. One note on that is that the drafting of evaluation questions is very often iterative. So all you have to do this week is to come up with a rough draft of the questions, and then I will provide feedback. And as you learn more, as you move on down the road, you can of course come back and edit your questions as you see fit.